Well, South Carolina's Comedy of Errors tour continues this Saturday. The Gamecocks pack up their traveling circus and comedy tour, headlined by head coach Shane Beamer, and travel down to Athens, Georgia for their annual beating at the hands of Kirby Smart and the Georgia Bulldogs. And I'm here to talk about it. Yeah, good morning, and that is Uncle Lou here. Yeah, that's right, it's me, Uncle Lou, live on LouTube for you. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it also, and in addition to that as well, make sure you subscribe to the channel if you're not already. I post college football videos almost every single day of the year, year-round. There's no off-season here. Full-time college football, 365 days a year. Call-in shows, live streams all the time. We have a really, really good time. Make sure you join the community. Hit that subscribe button. You know, every once in a while, this conversation will come up. It probably happens in other fan bases too, but it happens a lot within the Georgia fan base about which teams of Georgia's are rivals, right? Now, I'm kind of a traditionalist when it comes to college football. Georgia has three rivals: Auburn, Georgia Tech, and Florida. That's it. Now, I think what happens with a lot of people is they have a certain team maybe that they either hate the most, or a certain team that every year they want to beat that team the most, or maybe you've played a certain team and some of the games have been really, really good, and some fans want to lump those teams into the rivalry category. I'm not going to argue, I guess. If somebody wants to, if you're a Georgia fan or a fan of whatever team and you think they've got 8 or 9 different rivals, I guess you can feel that way. I kind of feel like, though, if you've got 8 or 9 different rivals, do you really have any at all? I mean, rivalry games are supposed to be different and separate than other games. Just playing a team every year, in my opinion, doesn't make them a rival. But anyway, I think a lot of it has to do, like I mentioned, with just certain teams that certain fans will say, yeah, I want to beat this team every single year. And I've been asked this question a bunch of times, and I've answered it the same way every single time. If you were to tell me there was going to be a season where Georgia would go 1-11, I would want that one win to be against South Carolina. Not because they're a rival, not because there's some heated competition going on between Georgia and South Carolina in terms of pecking order in the SEC or anything like that. For me, it's just purely geographical, right? I live in Augusta, Georgia. It's on the border of South Carolina. I've lived here my entire life. Growing up, I knew a lot of South Carolina fans. Literally right across the river from Augusta is North Augusta, South Carolina, and Aiken. And there's a lot of Gamecock fans over there. And I was friends with a lot of them. And every year, we'd get together and watch college football games, but we would make sure we got together and watched that Georgia versus South Carolina game every single year. There's also a big party held in Augusta every single year. Well, Augusta or North Augusta in South Carolina, it kind of rotates back and forth, called the Border Bash. Each team's cheerleaders come down, the mascots come down. There's about 20,000 people there, but a bunch of Georgia fans, a bunch of South Carolina fans, live bands, music, merchandise, tents. It's just a really good time. So it's developed into sort of a bit of a geographical rivalry, maybe. But if Georgia's going to go 1-11, I want that one win to be against South Carolina. And they're not going to have any problem doing that this year, I don't imagine. South Carolina's abysmal yet again. I'm not really a stats guy. I'm more of a just watch the games and draw conclusions guy. But you look up some of this stuff for South Carolina, and it's just absolutely abysmal. And I know what people are thinking. Well, South Carolina beat Georgia back in 2019. Yeah, an absolute miracle. An absolute miracle. And if South Carolina's got any chance of pulling off another miracle this season, it's going to take something similar to what happened in 2019, the last time South Carolina beat Georgia, the last time Georgia lost a game in Sanford Stadium. Georgia's currently got the longest home winning streak in the country. South Carolina was the last team to beat Georgia back in 2019. But what happened in that game? Well, that was Jake Fromm's third year. And it's a very well-known fact that Jake Fromm got progressively worse each year he was at UGA. Now, maybe there's outside factors we blame that on, changing offensive coordinators. The wide receivers weren't what they were, in 2019 that he had in 2017. We blame it on whatever you want. But the reality is Jake Fromm became worse every single year he was the quarterback at Georgia. And in that South Carolina game in particular, he had not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 turnovers. Jake Fromm threw 3 interceptions, one of which was a pick 6. He then had a fumble in the red zone. The best kicker in Georgia Bulldog history in terms of accuracy, just pure percentage, Rodrigo Blankenship, missed field goals in that game. I mean, this guy was automatic in his time at Georgia. Just everything that could go wrong did go wrong. And to South Carolina's credit, they took advantage of those miscues and they won the game by scoring one offensive touchdown. One. So, yeah, if something like that were to happen again, if Carson Beck were to turn the ball over 4 times, if Georgia were to miss multiple field goals, I guess it's possible South Carolina could pull off this upset yet again. Georgia was a 21-point favorite back in 2019 when they lost that game to a terrible South Carolina team that went on to a 4-8 season. This year, a little more than that. Georgia's almost a 4-touchdown favorite in this game. I checked this morning. The line is currently at 27.5. Georgia is favored. But look, it's a different head coach there at South Carolina now. It's Shane Beamer. And we're going to talk about this stand-up comedian act he's got going on in a second. But that was Will Muschamp that beat Georgia back in 2019. The same Will Muschamp that is currently on Georgia's staff as a co-defensive coordinator. So, that's out the window. But what has happened since then? Well, we've played South Carolina 3 times since then, 2020, 2021, 2022. Total score in those 3 games, 133-36. Georgia has beat South Carolina by a combined, 97 points combined in the last 3 meetings. All 3 games have been blowouts. South Carolina hasn't scored more than 16 points in the last 3 seasons. It's just been an absolute bloodbath 3 seasons in a row in this Georgia-South Carolina game, and I truly believe we're headed towards a 4th one here. This Saturday. South Carolina has not got off to a good start in 2023. A humiliating week 1 loss. They gave up 9 sacks in that game and rushed for -2 yards. Now, they played a nobody last week. They struggled in the first half, but did pull away some in the second half. But let's take a look at what South Carolina has done so far in 2023. And here's a hint. It hasn't been much. They're currently averaging 53 rush yards per game. Okay, that's dead last in the SEC. This is an issue that hounded them last year. South Carolina's 2 biggest problems last year: couldn't run the ball, couldn't stop the run. Now, they were great against the pass last year. Now, there was a couple of different reasons why that was. Number one, they had a couple of really good DBs, one of which is in the NFL right now. But the other thing is, South Carolina was so bad against the run last year that a lot of teams didn't even try to pass the ball against South Carolina. Or it's not that they didn't pass it, but, the game plan last year when you headed to play South Carolina was to run the ball because they were just so bad at it. And that has carried over into this year. They can't stop the run. They can't run the ball. 53 rush yards per game, dead last in the SEC. The next to the worst team in the SEC is averaging 114 rush yards per game. So South Carolina is over twice as bad at running the ball as the second worst team in the SEC. Second worst team, 114 yards a game. South Carolina, 53 yards a game. Defense, they're 90th in the country in total defense, 87th in the country in scoring defense, 101st in the country in pass defense, 71st in the country in rush defense. Spencer Rattler, Spencer Rattler's been a bright spot. Spencer Rattler's actually played well. Now, South Carolina doesn't have the weapons on the outside or at tight end for that matter, or at running back for that matter, that they had last year. Their offense has gotten progressively worse outside of South Carolina. Their offensive line is horrendous. They lost Jaheim Bell and Marshawn Lloyd to the transfer portal, and no matter how much the South Carolina man runs around all offseason talking about how they didn't need Jaheim Bell and they didn't need Marshawn Lloyd and they were hurt for this number of games, it's a ball-faced lie. Those were 2 of the best players you had on your entire team last year. And were they on your team today, they would be the 2 best players on your team, with the exception of maybe Spencer Rattler, who, to his credit, is having a really good year. Now, last year, Georgia played South Carolina early in the year, just like this year. Last year was Spencer Rattler's first season at South Carolina, and he did not get off to a good start last year. About halfway through the season, he had the worst QBR in the entire SEC. Now, he did get progressively better as the season went along, and we all remember how the season ended for South Carolina with those 2 big top 10 wins against Clemson and Tennessee. And in those 2 games, Spencer Rattler played great. He's played equally as great at the start of this season, but they don't have the pieces around him, even that they had last year. They just don't have them. But Spencer Rattler, to his credit, has played well. He's completing 83% of his passes. He's thrown for almost 700 yards through 2 games, 3 touchdown passes through the air, and 0 interceptions. So South Carolina's problems early this season cannot be placed on Spencer Rattler. The problems, like I mentioned, for South Carolina are obvious. Their O-line is absolutely horrendous. They can't run block and they can't pass block. 9 sacks allowed against North Carolina, a North Carolina team whose defense couldn't stop a nosebleed last year. Now, is it possible North Carolina ends up having a way better defense this season than they had last season? It's possible, but how much better, really? I don't think anybody thinks North Carolina's defense is better than Georgia's defense, do they? That's not to say Georgia's going to have 9 sacks. Georgia's got its issues too, by the way, early in the season. Georgia only 1 sack total through the first 2 games of the season. So who sort of wins this matchup of ineptitude, right? You've got Georgia, who's only got 1 sack, playing against South Carolina, who gave up 9 in 1 game to North Carolina. Who kind of wins that battle? I don't know. So now South Carolina didn't give up any sacks last week to whatever middle school team they played. So on average, through 2 games, South Carolina's given up 4.5 sacks a game. Georgia is getting a half a sack a game on average. Let's split the difference and say Georgia probably comes away with 2 sacks in this thing here. But what's the main reason that Georgia's going to win this game, other than the obvious, South Carolina just being horrendous in these areas that we mentioned? Offensive line, no real offensive weapons outside of Spencer Rattler, defense porous, bad lines of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. What's the number one reason why South Carolina has absolutely no chance in this game? Well, don't take it from me. Take it from Shane Beamer.
Shane, obviously, they've got a really good defensive line over there. Just what were they doing to maybe make things physical on the offensive side and maybe being able to get a push?
Who was doing?
Georgia's defensive line. What were they doing to maybe make things difficult on the offense?
They've got like 105-star football players on their defense. They have a defensive lineman that weighs 340 pounds and runs better than everybody on this call. They've got 5-star defensive backs. They're big and physical and fast. I mean, other than that, they're really freaking good. That's why they have the top defense in the country. They're hard to run the football on. So there wasn't some magical scheme they came out with tonight. They got 5-star recruits everywhere, and they play really physical. Damn.
And yeah, I know that Shane Beamer talking about last year's Georgia team. That was the post-game press conference last year after Georgia went to Columbia and absolutely humiliated South Carolina in front of their own fans. But do the math here. Georgia's defense is absolutely loaded yet again. Georgia's going to have one of, if not the best defenses in the country yet again. There are 5 stars at all 3 levels of the defense on Georgia yet again. The speed, size, and talent that Shane Beamer cries about in that post-game press conference from last year is still there. And that's why Georgia will win this game. This is purely a talent issue. I don't necessarily hate Shane Beamer or think that he's some kind of a terrible head football coach. In fact, I've said numerous times over the last 6 months off season, even this season after the North Carolina game, I actually think Shane Beamer's a pretty good fit at South Carolina. The recruiting is trending in the right direction. But the reality is this game is just an absolute mismatch, and South Carolina's got no chance to win it, barring what we talked about earlier, some kind of 4-turnover game by Georgia where South Carolina commits no turnovers. I mean, you have to remember, yes, Georgia lost to South Carolina in 2019. They gave up 1 defensive touchdown. There's just no excuse for ever losing a game where your defense gives up 1 touchdown, but Georgia found a way to do it in 2019. Not happening again this year, and your own head coach, Shane Beamer, right there tells you why. Now, here, honest criticism time for me from Shane Beamer. Now that I've said sort of the good, I like him. I think he's a good fit at South Carolina. I think he should stay there for a while. The recruiting trending in the right way. He's exceeded expectations each of his first 2 years in terms of a win total, right? Not sure that's going to happen this year. But anyway, so now that I've got kind of the positive out of the way, this guy's clown routine that he's got going on, the goofiness, the quirkiness, the stand-up comedy routine. I don't know any other way to describe it. The guy's just a fucking goofball. Now, that in and of itself is not bad, okay? But to come out with that song and dance after the North Carolina game is absolutely ridiculous. Never should have happened. It doesn't matter whether he was joking, whether he was claiming he was taken out of context, whatever. None of that matters. When you get beat like they got beat, the last thing you need to be doing as a head coach is coming into the post-game press conference and either trying to make jokes, if that's what he was doing, or actually sliding the blame. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, or you don't remember, or you've been under a rock for the last 2 weeks, Shane Beamer actually blamed hot dogs for his team's humiliating blowout loss in week 1 to North Carolina. Here's the clip.
It's kind of the story of the night. Clock was wrong the whole game. Trying to kick on one side, kick to start the second half, and we got away with the chain crew because they're eating a hot dog. That's the only disappointing thing about tonight. So I don't know what if things came out to be statistically, but not good enough. Colin got our chances.
There's a million things in that press conference that you could talk about and point to and say, bro, what are you thinking? Why did you say that? He doesn't have a stat sheet. Does South Carolina not have a sports information director? How do you head into a post-game press conference without a stat sheet in your hand? I don't know. He's asking the reporters if they have the stats because he doesn't know them or have them, whatever. And then, look, even if you're upset that the start of the third quarter was delayed by 30 seconds or whatever because the chain crew was not ready on the sideline, even if that's true, to come out and even mention that in a game where you got blown out, gave up 9 sacks, couldn't run the ball to save your life, North Carolina went up and down the field on you like you weren't even there. There were so many football issues in that game that to come out and criticize the chain crew because they were eating a hot dog or whatever, it comes across as completely foolish, clownish, ridiculous. And again, I get that that's part of Shane Beamer's charm to a lot of people, is his goofiness, his quirkiness. I mean, the guy's an oddball. There's no other way to say it. That routine works well after a win. It's not a good idea after a loss. It's a bad look. The idea that they would come out and even mention hot dogs, the chain crew, is absolutely unacceptable. I don't even know what I would do were I a fan of a team whose head coach came out and did something like that. So Georgia's got a new offensive coordinator this year, Mike Bobo, right? South Carolina fans know him, I'm pretty sure. New quarterback, Carson Beck, a couple of new running backs. Georgia's been dealing with some injury situations early in the year. We'll see if any of those guys play in this game. I'm mainly talking about starting running back Dejon Edwards and starting wide receiver Ladd McConkey, who have yet to play this season for Georgia in 2023. But the offense has rolled right along. Georgia's averaging about 45, 46 points per game. They've blown out 2 complete nobodies. Their defense has given up 10 points total over the course of the season. Georgia, are they perfect? No. They've struggled running the ball. The offensive line has struggled to move defensive lines off the ball, which is a little concerning considering the level of competition that Georgia has played. I also think we have to consider the possibility that Georgia's just looking at these games and they're kind of just rolling the ball out there. Now, I don't think they should do that. It makes me mad. I've complained about it for 2 weeks straight. I don't expect any of that to happen in this game here, though. This is a 3:30 game on CBS. I think the Georgia fans, the Georgia crowd, this home crowd, I think they have been waiting on this game. Georgia's used to starting off the season in big games. You have Clemson game a couple of years ago. You had the Oregon game last year. The COVID year was what it was. Nothing you can do there. 2019, Notre Dame at home. The schedule's just been absolutely horrific for Georgia this year. As a fan, I don't really know how you get excited to watch a team like Georgia go out and beat up on UT Martin and Ball State. And you have to wonder if some of that doesn't trickle down to the players and the teams. I mean, these guys are not robots. They read the same media reports we read. They see the same stories and hear the same talking heads on TV that we see and hear. Everybody on the planet knew Georgia was going to go out and just completely roll over those 2 teams. And Georgia came out in both of those games like a team that expected to just roll over those 2 teams. I don't expect that to be the case here. I think Georgia comes out, plays a full 4-quarter game. I think Georgia jumps on South Carolina early. I think the crowd will be rocking. 3:30 game on CBS. I think the players will be fired up for some Power 5 competition, a conference matchup against, I guess I'll agree that it's a geographical rival. I can't get off the rivalry thing. There's just a lot of Georgia fans that think, you got Georgia fans so Georgia's got the 3 rivals, Florida, Auburn, Georgia Tech, but then you got Georgia fans that think South Carolina's a rival, Tennessee's a rival, Alabama's a rival. I just don't agree. Just playing someone every year doesn't make them so. But okay, whatever. Maybe South Carolina's a geographical rival. Whatever. I think Georgia comes out, jumps on South Carolina early. South Carolina does not have the horses to keep up with UJ. They just don't. This will be Spencer Rattler's worst game of the season. Georgia leads the SEC in interceptions. I think they're in the top 10 nationwide. They've got 4 interceptions through is it 4 interceptions they've got through 2 games? I believe that's right. 4 interceptions through 2 games. I would like to see Georgia pressure Spencer Rattler. I would like to see Georgia get a couple of sacks in this game, and I would like to see Georgia be able to run the ball more effectively in this game, honestly, than they did in either of the first 2 games against UT Martin or Ball State. Not to suggest that Tennessee is worse along the defensive line than say a UT Martin or a Ball State. I just think the motivation factor, the fact that it's a conference game, national game of the week on CBS, the crowd will be rocking. I think the team will feed off of that energy. And just to be completely honest, South Carolina just doesn't have much in the way of a defensive line that should be standing in front of Georgia and their O-line. I think Carson Beck will have a good game, and I think Georgia's going to absolutely roll. Now, they're favored by 27.5. Do I think they will cover that? Well, let's see. Like I mentioned, they have beat South Carolina by about 100 points total over the last 3 years. That's an average of 33 points per game. I'm going to say they continue about the average. I think Georgia does cover the 27.5 points at home. And all the people that have been sitting around crying, bitching, and moaning about how Georgia ain't played nothing but an FCS team and a group of 5 team, and we need to see Georgia play a Power 5 team or an SEC team before we can get on board or see whether they're any good or not. Now, here's my prediction for that. Georgia's going to come out and beat the absolute soul and will to live out of Shane Beamer and the South Carolina Gamecocks. It's going to be an absolute bloodbath. Georgia's going to absolutely destroy this podunk program on Saturday in Athens, Georgia. And the same fans who've been waiting to see that are going to show up after the game on Sunday morning and tell me how terrible South Carolina is and ask me, who have Georgia played? Woo. They're not going to care. Georgia can win this game 100-0. Nothing changes anybody's mind about Georgia. Unless Georgia plays the Buffalo Bills next week, the Kansas City Chiefs the week after that, the Philadelphia Eagles the week after that, and then the San Francisco Giants San Francisco 49ers and Dallas Cowboys in road games in back-to-back weeks. Nobody's going to be impressed with anything Georgia does. But hey, when you win a national championship 65-7, the worst beating, not just in playoff history, but in the 100-year history of bowl games, the absolute worst beating in the history of bowls, there's not really much you can do for an encore after that. So I don't blame all you dummies for not being impressed with anything Georgia does and crying about their schedule nonstop. The only thing you should be thankful for is that you're not on it. Have a good morning.